There was no one else in my car when I headed west in the summer of 2012, but I wasn't traveling alone. Along with my atlases and maps, I carried a box filled with a couple dozen books. Over the previous year, knowing I'd be returning to the West, I'd also returned to the two writers who'd helped me make sense of the region. When I mentioned the names of these writers in the East, I sometimes got befuddled looks. More than once I'd been asked, Wallace Stevens? Edward Albee? No, I'd patiently explain, Wallace Stegner and Edward Abbey. When this happened, I'd always rush to their defense. Wallace Stegner, I'd say, won the Pulitzer Prize for a novel one year and the National Book Award for another the next, and single-handedly corrected many of the myths about the American West. As for Ed Abbey, he wrote a novel that sparked an entire environmental movement. Have you heard of Monkey Wrenching or Earth First? And a work of nonfiction that some consider the closest thing to a modern Walden. My first stop was in Kentucky at the home of Wendell Berry, the great writer who'd taken classes with the man he called Mr. Stegner. From there I pointed the car toward El Dorado Springs, Colorado, where I'd lived when I first moved west. From Colorado I traveled to Arches National Park, where Abbey wrote his great book, and from there to the fracking boomtown of Vernal, Utah, where I flew in a small plane over the dry, cracked lands. I drove on to Stegner's hometown of Salt Lake City, and then down to what Abbey called the Dam of Glen Canyon. The next 9 days were spent paddling the San Juan River before heading north to Yellowstone and then on to the Stegner homestead in Saskatchewan. The West, I found, was a place of startling beauty and jaw-dropping sights, but also a place in a world of trouble. It seems to me that anyone who cares to really think about the world today has to hold both of these things in mind, to remember to see the beauty and still take joy in it, but not shy away from the hard and often ugly reality. I found that Wallace Stegner and Ed Abbey, who after all walked the same path long ago, were well suited to help guide us in this difficult task. Before I left on my trip, I'd occasionally wondered how relevant these two long-deceased writers would be. What I came to believe is that in this overheated and overcrowded world, their books can serve as guides. What I came to believe is that they challenge us in the realms of both activism and art, and that Wallace Stegner and Edward Abbey, far from being regional or outdated, have never been more relevant.